This is the second session of a series of sessions that at the Global Business School Network we felt was important to convene. And I'll talk about our partner, Korn Ferry, in just a minute. I'm Dan LeClaire. I'm CEO of the Global Business School Network, which is a group of about 135 business schools in more than 50 countries focused on building management education capacity in and for the developing world. And our emphasis is not just on access to management education, but access to the right kind of management education and providing learners with opportunities that they didn't have before. So for us, when we think about this series, this webinar series, the driver is that many business schools claim that their role is to prepare students for jobs that don't yet exist. And the idea is that the environment is changing so quickly and so unpredictably that when we think about the kinds of education that we provide, we need to think about preparing students for jobs that we don't quite yet know about. So in conversations with Korn Ferry, and I'll introduce Grace Chu in particular, we thought what better way to help not only students at GBSN schools, but also faculty at GBSN schools to understand what these might look like. What better way than to talk to the people who are actually creating those jobs of the future. So again, welcome to this session 2 of the series. And our partner, a global powerhouse in talent consulting for many, many years, Korn Ferry, and in particular, Grace Chu, who I met originally in Singapore earlier in her career, who went on to work with Korn Ferry. Together, we've created this series for your benefit. So Grace Chu is Principal, Regional Account Lead, and Program Director at Korn Ferry, where she focuses on building corporate development and talent management programs for boards and executive committees. This work involves the development of next practices, sustainable value creation, and innovation management. And that innovation in particular, I think the driver for her and I working together to develop this series. She works with senior management on external succession planning, talent strategy, and change management. And across sectors, she's worked with in industrial sector, technology, healthcare, government, and worked with C-level positions that shape the future of mobility and software and new energy. As I mentioned, we met when she was working previously supporting government initiatives on regional growth. She's fluent in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Malay, and does well also in French, if I understand things, Grace. So we're happy to be working with Grace. She's going to facilitate the session this morning and introduce our main guest, Asina. So Grace, it's all yours. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the kind introduction, and a pleasure to meet everyone who has joined us today. So I'd love to go straight into the introduction of Asina, and thank you so much, Asina, for joining us. Asina is the CEO of Resnove Group, a consulting company that helps businesses grow, obtain venture financing, pivot, and expand globally. Resnove in Latin actually stands for the start of something new or innovation. Asina was previously also the CEO of Institute, an unmanned aviation company, and she was an executive of companies including Boeing, Adidas, Visa, and Anderson Consulting. Asina has spent 25 years helping both startups and multinational global business achieve significant revenue and profitability growth. She's very well versed in commercial and defense markets and has worked across a range of industries from high tech to aerospace, to media, oil and gas, finance, and even sports. Asina also is a friend of the House of Korn Ferry. She's a well-respected executive and a superstar leader in both the startup and multinational corporation world. We invited her today to share about the unmanned industry and to join our discussion about jobs of the future and skills that students should equip themselves with to be successful in the future workforce. Asina, thank you again so much for joining us today. And let's start the discussion with telling us more about the unmanned industry. What is it and what are the communities that it serves?
Thank you, Grace. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that kind introduction. And to everybody around the globe, I think we're all around the globe. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in unmanned industry the last 15 or so years of my life. And, you know, the unmanned industry is basically unmanned aerial vehicles or ground vehicles or underwater. I was dealing with the aerial vehicles, and many of you know them as drones. And they're basically remotely piloted air vehicles. That means they have a pilot who's controlling it from the ground. And in the future, going forward, we'll see some advancement in what we call the true autonomy of these aircrafts, which is not just autonomous takeoff and landing, but also ability of these aircrafts to sense and avoid other obstacles and even autonomously change their behavior based on the external environment, threats, or mission parameters. You know, so the slide that you see, these are different types of air vehicle, unmanned vehicles, or UAVs as we call them. The ones that are currently being used are here on the left side, and then there are some future ones for future uses that probably you most hear about, which are kind of the exciting uses. And we'll talk about those in just a second. So here on the left, we have 2 rows of different kinds of vehicles, from small hobby grade vehicles like DJIs, for example, that some of you might have, that are used for kind of commercial applications and creating videos and shooting pictures. They're called tier 1s UAV because they're very small and they're usually quadcopters or hand launchable airplanes. To the medium size, which is the company I worked for, that's an integrator platform for a company called In Situ, which was a tier 2, tier 3 type vehicle. And then, of course, the third one that you've probably seen in many Hollywood movies, large Predators and Reapers, the tier 4 and 5 type vehicles based on their size. Below that, you know, you're seeing different types of other air vehicles. We see some propagation of recently. Some of them include helicopters. We have hybrid VTOLs, which is a vertical takeoff and landing type vehicle, and then even something they call tail sitters. So all kinds of things out there. But the interesting thing right now, I mean, there's much talk about in this industry, but currently most of these, outside of DJIs that are used kind of commercially and for hobby type purposes, most of these air vehicles have military application. Missions that we called ISR type mission, which means intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or for industries that are more like civil type industries, such as firefighting, border patrol, search and rescue, disaster relief. Basically, anywhere where the imagery or signal from these aircrafts is used to provide some type of situational awareness over some type of a dangerous terrain or area without having to put a pilot in danger. What we're going to, you know, look for to do in future with these things more commercially. Many are hoping that one day we're going to have, you know, pizzas or beer or some packages delivered, or other type of cargo delivery, whether we're transporting passengers or packages. That's basically the urban air mobility type things. So in urban cities and congested cities, the hope is that we're going to have these autonomous flying vehicles or cars of sort, providing that kind of next level of flight and future. And there's many different types of drones that are being currently created for those applications specifically, but none of them are flying like such at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sina, for shedding some light. Now the question is, you know, what do these unmanned vehicles solve? What is the problem?
Well, usually the problem they're solving is some kind of, like I said, you know, for military in particular, or for civil, it's some kind of a situational awareness. So we're observing something and providing a signal. It can be a radio signal, electrical signal, It can be a video, usually most often is video, and it gives us an ability to observe an area, let's say in firefighting. It's very dangerous for pilots to fly, especially nobody flies at night for firefighting. So a lot of times they lose the awareness of the situation of kind of how the fire has changed over the night. So we can put these types of vehicle in the air without endangering the pilot, and they can provide a video and survey the area flying around with this remotely piloted operator that can, provide the same imagery as the regular airplane. We usually kind of say the unmanned vehicles are for 3D type mission, dirty, dull, and dangerous missions. So, where you kind of don't want to put human in the danger. The rest, the autonomy really itself is just kind of more of a buzz. It just, the autonomy just allows us not to put humans in the cockpit in danger. And then for future applications such as air taxis and things like that, you kind of want this vehicle to fly on its own without having to have a trained pilot operate it.
Wonderful. What a meaningful industry. Great. Sina, so you've worked at startups, you've worked at large companies across different industries. And from what I understand, innovation has been the common thread across, unmanned aerial vehicles. It's been finance. It's been across sports, apparel, etc. So, what is the common thread that you see across companies to innovate, and how do we create room for innovation?
Yeah. So innovation is like this topic. My company is all about innovation and disruption. Resnove means literally kind of revolutionary new things, and you can take them in good or kind of maybe not so good aspects. But for me, it's this idea of disruption and innovation that every company needs to be thinking about constantly, because innovation and disruption is almost like a circulatory system in your body. It's essential for survival. It's everywhere. It impacts all parts of our body. It's constantly renewed. So the same thing with kind of innovation and disruption in the companies. You have to have it. It's essential for survival. It constantly needs to be renewed and impacts all parts of the organization. And so what I talk about is there's really many ways to innovate. And here's an example. For example, let me talk about just in situ, because that company has been considered a great innovator of its time. Many think about just kind of innovating product itself, which we've done a lot of it. But what we started doing is also innovating the way the product is used. So when you think traditionally of an airplane, they require runways. We've disrupted that by creating an aircraft that, if it's autonomous, it doesn't have a pilot, you can basically launch it from a catapult, and because we don't care about the G's, and recover it on something like a vertical rope suspended from some kind of a vertical structure. So you see here launch and recovery equipment for this aircraft that all of a sudden you didn't need a runway for. So now if we're talking about military application, people taking these vehicles into remote areas where they don't have the previously established infrastructure, it's a great way to kind of break into the industry in a whole new way, even with the established companies that had planes, like Boeing, for example, and eventually Boeing ended up buying in situ because of that particular element of innovation. The second way to innovate, in which we did innovate, was in services, in operational models. So you would think, okay, we're an aircraft company, so let's sell some hardware. But we actually offered to military not hardware, but a service. And we called it a pixel by the hour, which meant that we are providing video by the hour. And you kind of ask, what are these things used for? Well, we realized that a lot of our military customers care about the image over a certain area. They didn't care where the image came from and what the vehicle that delivered that image. So rather than having them buy planes, they bought the video. And that actually allowed us to tap into different funding sources with military that allow us to accelerate our procurement process and also accelerate our own product innovation, back to that product innovation, because the customer didn't care about the vehicle itself. They cared about a video. We were able to then make numerous, like in 1 year, we made over 50 to 60 different technological changes on the platform alone, because the customer just cared as long as the video is coming to me. We could have made, all kinds of improvements in reliability on aircraft speed, weight, etc. We see similar innovation right now, let's say modern, Tesla type things, where a lot of vehicle type improvements are pushed through software. So you can innovate much more quickly in terms of capability of the product without having to change the hardware. And that is much easier for company to push to the consumer, also manage in terms of inventory, operational cost, and things like that. And then the final, innovation we had was in actual how the product was used. Originally, the platform was envisioned for things like weather monitoring in place or in situ in Latin, that's the name. And that involved, hey, we can launch these things off of ships. So let's go help fishermen find schools of tuna. And little did these, innovators and original owners know that the product did so many other things except the first two things they thought they were going to do. We did all kinds of other missions except finding tuna or, measuring weather in situ. And so the third type of innovation is really this agility of the company to stay agile and innovate enough to be able to adapt to the changes in the customer market. So I'm bringing these up because, the innovation is so broad, and I'm bringing these less common examples to kind of demonstrate that there's many different ways to innovate. I always say the entire company can innovate, every function can innovate and can disrupt, and they should continuously disrupt themselves and stay open to new ideas. I always say good ideas come from everywhere. We have to be open to great ideas. And because you never know where they can lead, from tuna to military.
Love that. That's excellent, Christina. Well, and I like the fact that you brought up agility, because we know that a smart growth leader is the one who outperforms the market, is one who is agile, is one who navigates the volatile and ever-changing world. Now, we see that you have evolved your career in a way that you have rotated across functions, you have rotated across industries, so you have seen a lot of the world. All right, and that may have provided you with that perspective to innovate, right? Because if you sit in a room where you have worked for 20 years, it's hard to look outside in. Tell us more about how did you evolve your career the way you did? And is cross-functional experience and cross-industry experience something you look out for when you hire?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We look for that, and my career happened to really evolve organically through mostly my network and personal curiosity. I'm sure all our callers have a similar kind of thing, and not being somebody who shied away from challenges. So, I would see an unmet need, or I would think of some kind of innovative idea, and my managers will let me run with it, and then they would say, "Hey, can you do something else for us?" And I would always take those projects, regardless on how challenging or daunting they seemed, because I always felt like early on in my career, hey, this is just another tool in my professional toolbox that I can get in terms of my skills. So I worked in many industries and across all functions, ultimately getting into the CEO position. But over years, what I really realized is that industries and markets have accelerated so much, and there's been so many common challenges and cross-pollination of practices across industry that companies do appreciate those employees who have seen a variety of things and solve problems from a different perspective. So if we, for example, look at the challenges of global companies today, they have global supply chain challenges. They all want to do automation. They care about digitalization and new manufacturing methods. They care about diversity, et cetera. So if you work on that type of project, and the interesting thing is you don't have to be functionally specific to work on those projects, because these are cross-functional type of problems. Then in one industry, if you work on that type of project in one industry, another industry may recruit you to solve the same challenge for them. So that's how I was recruited to Adidas from Boeing. Sports and planes, what did they have in common? But they had the exact same kind of challenges and problems. And they were specifically, in Adidas, they were specifically looking for somebody from outside of the industry, somebody who can think about it from a different perspective, but who have solved these types of problems in the past. So people are kind of trying to innovate by having that different perspective. And I sit on a number of boards similarly, and I just recently had this discussion where the leadership was looking for a engineer who was familiar with turbine engines, but who also ideally had some PM experience and also some experience setting up global supply chains. And so, so people are looking more and more for what they call unicorn type of candidates, and don't get me wrong, if you're very standardized in your career, if you're you can be an engineer, a recruiter, accounts, payroll specialist, or similar like that, there's many jobs for you. But if companies have two candidates with the same set of functional skills, they will look and appreciate those who have seen, opportunities across many different industries and had maybe solved this in different types of environment. So, if people want jobs in startup these days, my recommendation is get those tools in your toolbox early on in the career, and get as much exposure to these challenging projects and different projects as possible in one industry, and then you can branch from there into different industries.
Wonderful. Well, that really resonates with me. The work that we do at Korn Ferry, we do a lot of searches for complex roles that require that unicorn that you mentioned, right? The person who comes from various backgrounds can look at problems from different ways, and yet is also an expert in the topic. So
Exactly.
we see that exactly in the industry, not just in general management, but even in technology roles, as well as commercial roles, right? As problems in the world, as we move from this hardware to software solution selling, the kind of skill sets that people have are changing. So with that, it's a good segue into skills, the topic about skills. What are the skills that business schools should continue to instill in their students that you need in the workplace?
Well, first of all, I myself finished a business school, and I thought that was a great way to get exposed to many different new frameworks and ideas and thoughts. So great for students. You have picked the right thing to go after. But I understand and appreciate that business schools have a curriculum they need to go through and have a certain skills that they need to impart. What I would suggest is way to do what I called as many applied soft and hard skills as they relate to that curriculum. So what do I mean to that? I mean skills that are kind of team-based, project-based, cross-functional, and address the current business problems in the area. And what are some of those soft skills? So almost all work-related projects will be in teams, and most challenging one, to your point, will be those cross-functional. So whether we're developing hardware or software, offering a service, putting out a proposal, developing pricing, working with a supplier, it doesn't matter. We work with teams and cross-functional teams. So the sooner the students master these soft skills that include team facilitating and team building, team leading, communications across functional teams, negotiation, communication and conflict resolution, communication across different types of personalities and ages, the sooner people get those soft skills, the better, because they will deal with those every day in their work life. And then when we have those soft skills that apply to every project, there is also some hard skills that are not necessarily always taught in business schools, but they're kind of used every day in a business world. And those are things like program management, risk assessment and mitigation of risks, things like Lean and Sigma practices, work breakdown structures approaches, setting, measuring, and assessing metrics, even skills like Excel, PowerPoint, presentations to executive leadership. All of those are skills that are not necessarily part of business school curriculum, but you kind of need them in everyday life. So for business schools and professors, those professors that tend to collaborate with industry, I think do really well. to have like businesses come up with a problem that is in the area that the professor is relating to. And then if there is a way, it's kind of like a capstone, but try to do not capstone just like maybe once at the end of semester or at the end of the year, but kind of every project that's being done, if there is a way to do these apply skill and embed those skills, such as working in teams, collaborating, providing feedback, having constructive disagreement, and developing metrics. What is this? What did make this project successful? How do we know we're making progress? Developing a project plan for a certain project. Those are some of the things, if there's a way to kind of fold that into the curriculum, I think it would be very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Well, what is the best advice that a mentor of yours has given you about being successful at the workplace?
I was super lucky that I had my very first mentor in my very first job as an intern in a high-tech company where I was being an engineer. And he was a very senior leader. And the best advice he gave me, he said, look and observe what type of problems does the senior leadership of the company care about. Get yourself on that project and find a way to present some kind of a finding to them at the end of that project. And he goes, and he was happy. He said, I am happy to help you find that project once you assess kind of what are the problems area you observe and what are you interested in. And so he placed me on that project, and I was immediately visible to the senior leadership. And that was fantastic. So he started me off. I was lucky to get him like right at the beginning of my career. And I apply that for the rest of my career. I look at what are the most pressing problems, and then I raise my hand. I'm scared to raise my hand. I'm like, can I do this? But we find a way. And if the leadership care about that project, if you do a great job, and if you present to them something that will help their company, I found that is the fastest way to kind of grow and excel in your career, regardless of what it is.
Wonderful. That's great advice for students who are just at the start of their career. So with that, thank you so much, Asina, for sharing your insights, such a rich discussion. And we're doing very well on time. We would love to take some questions from the floor, and I'll hand the time over to you, Dan, to facilitate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Grace and Asina. That was wonderful. That was very interesting. And I hope you don't mind that I'll pose questions from the attendees, perhaps, Grace, not only for Asina, but perhaps for you as well. I think that there are, judging from the questions, some opportunities there. But I wanted to just continue just a little bit longer with the mentor discussion that, Grace, you started with, Asina. And, the idea that you had a mentor perhaps was accidental early in your career. But I'm wondering if you could give some advice about getting mentors
Yes.
early in your career, and identifying those and getting them on board to help support you.
Yes, I love the topic of mentorship because I love being a mentor because it has made such a, so thank you for asking that question. I'm very excited about the topic because it has helped me so much in my career. And I was lucky enough to have an internship experience where a person grabbed me under their wing and helped me out. We've tried to do that in every company that I've worked since then, have a very meaningful internship experience where we do assign mentors. But, my experience has been, once you have a mentor, you never stop wanting to have a mentor. And so I've had mentors my entire life. I still have mentors. Some of them are now in their 80s and 90s, but they have guided me through my career, and I recommend everybody to find one. And the way I do it, it's maybe a little bit controversial because many companies do offer mentorship kind of program, kind of structured programs, which if they do, great, utilize them if you want to. But I like a much more organic approach to mentoring. There's always somebody in the company that just smiles a little extra when they see you, that just, goes a little bit out of their way to say hi, check in on you, help you out on a project. And, if that person is senior to you and you like how they operate, ask, I would always approach them and ask them, hey, would you mind being my unofficial mentor, somebody that I can just bounce ideas off of from time to time? And 10 out of 10 times they always agreed, because because they've already expressed that little extra special interest in you. So for me, it's kind of observing and finding that connection with somebody, or if you admire, if people admire somebody, somebody's approach to how they solve problems or tackle problems or present problems, those are the people that I would pick and go for. And for female members in the audience, don't shy away from male mentors. I highly recommend them. And also for, the opposite, maybe seek a different perspective, because it does help sometimes that kind of cross gender communication to get a perspective from perhaps person who might have some diversity element from you. Can be either, gender diversity or professional diversity or race or, whatever kind of diversity, whatever maybe you're having challenges with or struggling to understand in terms of business place, maybe find a mentor in that particular area, is my experience.
I like all of what you said, but in particular, that last point about diversity. I think sometimes we, as learners, and we're all learners, we tend to gravitate towards the people that are like us, right? When the reality
We're good the way you are.
Right.
You want to be better in other areas, right? That you're maybe not as strong in. Yes, exactly.
I want to get to one of the questions posed by the attendees, but since you brought it up, I can't help but ask a question about gender. If I were to tell somebody I'm going to talk with a leader that has experience as an engineer, that's been an entrepreneur in the technology space, that works with the defense industry, I'm not convinced the first image that would come to mind is a woman. They would almost, so I'm going to ask the question, in addition to what you just provided about mentoring, what other advice would you give to women based on your experience? And I don't know the numbers, but what I suspect are largely dominated by males still in those types of industries.
Yeah, it is. And all these industries are doing much, much better in diversifying. They have now teams focused on that, leadership focused on that. So they're doing better, but you're right. The ratios are still not as good, especially as you get to a more and more senior role. There's a lot of studies that suggest it's okay kind of at the entry level position, but by the time we get to the most senior executive type roles, that 50% male to female becomes something like, 80, I'm not exactly sure, but the numbers are really like 80, 20, 90, 10, sometimes even 95, 5, depending on the industry. And so, yeah, certainly I've been in one of those, military, aviation, engineering, it is very male dominated. And what and I've done a lot of presentations to kind of female audiences and young women professional kind of in their career. So if any of your students, want to reach out to me, feel free. Like I said, I love mentoring young new generations of leaders. But what I would recommend to them is be yourself and don't be afraid. This is a little bit of a stereotype, and I hate the stereotype, but it's somewhat true. Women tend to look for promotion or for projects when they feel like they can do it and they're qualified enough to do it. Where, men typically, not in all cases, I don't like to stereotype, but, they tend to, be more up for the challenge, and they say, hey, I'll kind of figure it out as I go. If I waited till I was ready, I would never get on a different project or get promoted because I was absolutely not ready for any of the jobs that I ever had or any projects that I ever had. There was always a little bit of that fear and a little bit of this imposter syndrome, like, can I do this? How, oh my God, I've never done this. How do I do this? Especially when you switch from, engineering to finance, or you switch from, finance to supply chain. It's such a new world. You think you can never do it. If you're early in the career, there's always so much help that comes to you from so many parts of the organization if you're not afraid of ask, and if you're not afraid to admit that you don't know something, or if you're not afraid to ask for help. And so I would say, bring your authentic self, number one, and I'll tell you something about that in just a second, because I think it's important, but to just finish this thought, the second part is, accept that challenge before you're ready. Stretch yourself on purpose. There is no mistakes early on in career. Later on, there are mistakes, but early on, you can kind of explore, you can learn, and every one of those projects becomes that one tool that you might need later in life, later in your professional career, when you're more senior. It might help you with something in the future. So I've collected all these different tools in my toolbox, to where now it's very hard to find a problem where I just kind of can't land on my feet. And that gives you this incredible confidence that, that allows you to go search for new opportunities, new projects, new adventures. But the second part I do want to bring up is the importance of kind of being yourself. I've had female bosses and female mentors, and sometimes, and they're all different. Some think they need to be tough to be in the man's world, kind of never show any emotional weakness. Some think they need to be more agreeable, like, oh, let's allow the team to bring up the idea so it looks like it's theirs, not mine. I've seen all kinds of different things of women, and I've been in this business for a long, long time. So, this is early on in the days of women in the workforce. I'm dating myself a little bit, but, they felt like they have to be something they're not to kind of fit in that world. And my advice is, for any diversity candidate, this is not just, females, but any diversity candidate, companies with diverse people, it's proven that they do 30, 40+% better than those that don't have diversity. And so if you are not succeeding being yourself in one company, try in another company. Like, don't change yourself, because being your most authentic self is the most important thing. And that's how you're going to be most successful. And there's so many companies out there that are now looking for diversity in their midst, that you will find the one where your authentic self will shine and will bring the value. And you should be your authentic self, because that is how you help those companies become 30%, 40% better with their stocks, which has been proven. If companies that have, for example, just women in leadership, not many studies have been done. New studies are now coming with diversity in leadership, but even just with women in leadership, they're doing, on average, about 30% better on NASDAQ than those who don't have female leadership. So fantastic figures. I'm sure Grace knows all about it.
Very well said, Athena. Well, to add to that as well, right? So for women out there, don't shy away from opportunities. We had a few very challenging searches we did last year, one of which was a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer for an automotive company. Now think about an automotive world where it's very male dominated. Now, when I had reached out to this lady who is an expert in this field, she was very, very happy that I reached out. She put herself out there, right? She went for the opportunity. She said, yes, everything that Athena said, she represented that, right? Like, yes, I can do this. It's a big challenge, but I'm going to step up to the opportunity. And in the end, she actually got hired as the Chief Technology Officer, which was a win for everyone, for her, for us. And, for us, it's an equal opportunity kind of search. So if you can do the job, you can fit into the culture, you want the job, you are considered. And so she was very grateful for that opportunity. For women out there, don't shy away from opportunities, and get your name out there, create a great LinkedIn profile, be noticed, and take the calls when you're noticed.
No. Well, thanks both Asina and Grace for that. I suspect we could continue that discussion even further, but I want to make sure to get to a couple of questions that popped into the chat, not just into the Q&A. And Abdikani from USIU in Kenya is interested in making a shift from the civil society, from NGO to the business sector. And given especially your cross-sectoral experiences, Sina, I'm wondering, and Grace, you might want to chime in on this too, given your government experience, but I'm wondering if you could give Abdikina some advice.
Grace, do you want to start? Because I feel like I've kind of talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to start. So first of all, in the NGO sector, what are some of the skills that you have, right? Is it project management? Is it about business development? Is it about, selling, right? Is it presentation? Is it marketing? A lot of NGOs need funding. That's a very important skill. And then delivering projects, right? And depending on what the NGO stands for, is it education, etc. So the first thing I would say is figure out what are some of the skill sets that you have that are similar to other industries. Right, so maybe even consulting for social enterprises, right? Those are some very low-hanging fruit. And then go for those roles that you think you can bring something to the company, right? That's a very good start. And when you want to apply for a job, for us, it's especially the lower and more junior levels, it's about, I liken it to throwing darts, right? The more darts you throw, the higher chances are of hitting the bullseye, right? So put yourself out there, keep applying until you get an opportunity to interview, and you'll see where that brings you to.
Yeah, and I noticed Abdikani said that he's a program manager, and it's, I just mentioned that as one of the critical high skills. Program managers are so sought after in the business sector. This is one of the, and I would even recommend it for students who don't get that in the business school to go out there and consider getting their own, PMP, or at least getting some classes, online classes, or some kind of a self-study course on how to be a program manager. You learn so many tools and skills to manage a project, to manage risk, to manage resources, to kind of drive and delegate authority over people over which you don't have authority. And you learn how to deal with shortage of resources, shortage of budgets, which is kind of every day in the business world. So some skills like that, and going to business school is a perfect segue to switching any kind of career. I went from an engineering after business school into consulting. So business school allows you this ability to pivot without anybody asking really any questions, especially if you want to go to any business sector. But Abdikani, you as a program manager, you're a hot commodity, and don't be afraid. That skill works for NGO, and it works for any industry. Wherever you go, you can use your skill set, and they'll be happy to have that skill set, because there's not many people who have certified program managers out there. Same with schedulers, data analysts, software, some kind of software engineers that deal with automation, digitalization, AI, cyber security. Those are kind of the jobs of the future that there is such a shortage of and demand of in the high-tech industry that I've observed, that you can't go wrong with any kind of those specialized skill sets.
Thanks. We only have a few more minutes. I hope you don't mind just going a few more minutes, Asina and Grace, with some additional questions. I suspect, Asina, you've already begun to address Sahim's question about the undergraduate versus master's level education when you talked about pivoting, right? Yes. Often people use the master education as a way to pivot into different experiences. But I wonder if you might add something to his question, and we'll get to Sally's question soon.
I would just add one thing. and this is kind of interesting because I am engineer in heart. You know, when I talk about hard skills versus soft skills, hard skills, I'm thinking like very specific kind of functional type skills, and softer skills are more like, you know, emotional intelligence, presenting, negotiating, bargaining, you know, those types of things. And so you know, school teaches you the skills you need to have in the job from the perspective of those kind of functional skills. For any student, whether a master or undergraduate, I'm going to tell you one thing that is an absolute must. And again, I was very fortunate early on in my career to do a lot of presentations because I come from a country where people were interested in kind of what was going on in that country at the time when I was very young. So I started doing a lot of presentations, but honing those presentation skills. And especially when you're kind of more senior in a company, a master graduate coming at a higher level, written skills, communication skills, and presenting skills are exceptionally important, exceptionally important. You know, and there's going to be a day where you're going to, every person in their career gets put in front of the executives to present on something. And what an opportunity that is. You know, talking about an important project to a senior team is the best way to kind of push your career into something exciting and new. But it's also could be at that moment that really shuts you down. And so, so I'm just going to kind of, if you focus on innovation in your field and you have a great way to communicate what you want to do, the many doors open. so you know, if there's two things to know about is know how to present your great idea, next great idea, and you'll be very successful. I don't know, maybe I'm just boiling it down too low, but I think that's a certain way of succeeding.
Thanks for that. The questions keep rolling in. I need to say not just in the Q&A, but in the chat. I think we have time for one more, but before I get to that question, one just popped in from Sandhya, a doctoral student who asked something specifically about drones. And I don't know, Sina, if you would be willing to answer that question quickly before we get to Sally's as a final question.
Yes, into consumer markets, yes. The greatest impediment, so the most hype is about commercial application of drones. And today I will tell you with confidence that nobody's making money doing commercial type of activities with drones, which is crazy. Most of all of the current income is based out of military type of applications. Outside that, you know, somebody selling hardware for experimental type things. Nobody's yet providing what I call too many commercial services to where they can make, you know, be a large company, a decent company. But the biggest impediment is regulatory. The regulators are not sure how to put a pilotless drone into the national airspaces. You know, what happens if you lose the comm link? What happens if you, you know, lose the vision, whatever is providing you the vision and awareness of where you are? And a lot of these vehicles are still don't have the redundancy that is needed for you know, for kind of commercial application when you're flying over a populated area. A lot of these drones currently are flying for military type of purposes, usually, you know, in remote areas, over bases, kind of, you know, around the bases where there's not much chances of hitting something. But, you know, with commercial use, that is a very big impediment. And primarily it's this autonomous behavior of an aircraft. How do you sense and avoid objects like a pilot would? And then, you know, if you lose a link, how do you do it autonomously without having a pilot in the loop? And so we need to solve the sense and avoid type of issues, just like in automotive industry. But, you know, in the aerospace, there's still struggle of what does sense and avoid mean. The regulators are struggling to say, okay, you know, what does the pilot see? How do we define what a pilot vision is, right? A lot of times machines are better than pilots in seeing objects because we have radars and things like that. But they're even struggling to write the regulation to regulate these things in the commercial world, that those things are going to take years. And when it comes to flying taxis, the biggest impediment is everybody's going electric. And electric just simply currently for airline applications, for air applications, does not have enough energy right now to provide meaningful flights. Like they can stay in the air for about 20 minutes. So for those short hops, you can do it, but you only have about 20 minutes of runtime with large electrical engines. With cars, it's different because you don't care so much about the weight of the batteries, but in planes you do. And so that is another impediment to air transport. So we are seeing the emergence of hybrid engines. So another job of the future are people who are, good with hydrogen, for example, as a source of fuel for engines, or other sources of fuel, new types of silicons for engines and other things like that. And so, these aircraft still need to have redundancy, which is going to make them very expensive, more expensive than cars. They still need to fit into regulatory environment, and they need to have a good source of fuel that is going to make these things more reliable than just reciprocating engine. Otherwise, we're back to just regular planes. And so it's exciting and cool, but there's just still so many problems to solve. And one of the bigger problems is also the cost of these things. The airplanes cost so much for a reason, because they have sometimes 10 to the -9 degree of safety and redundancy, all this redundancy to make it safe in the air. By the time you put all of that on an aircraft, even if it's a flying taxi, how much is it going to cost, and how do we make all that technology cheaper through automation?
It's amazing to hear how things are converging and evolving so quickly with the technology. And thanks for asking that question, Sandhya. But I'm afraid we have to stop with the questions at the moment. Sally, we didn't get to your questions, but maybe Asina is willing to just, in her final remarks, address this, especially Sally's. Well, let me just pose it. Sally's question, I think, is especially interesting because of your emphasis on getting out and volunteering essentially for jobs, right? To be to stretch yourself and to cut across industries. But then how do you also remain focused on a path and ensure that you use your time wisely? Maybe you can end your remarks with just a comment about that.
It's a very great question because, I think different paths are for different people. I kind of saw the question and I chuckled a little bit because, it's me. I like differences. I like to do, I like to wake up and do a different thing every day. It's not really drifting to do many things. If you think it is kind of, certain types of skills that you have that allows you to, especially in business schools. I mean, business school is all about teaching you about different ways to solve problems. That's how I envision my business schools. It's like putting common knowledge in a framework that can be, digested into smaller pieces and solved in a kind of a little more structured way. And then you have different tools to help you, solve that problem. So for me, it's not a drift when I'm feeling like, okay, I'm solving a problem. I don't care what kind of problem I'm solving, as long as it makes the world a better place. I do like to improve things in the world, and I do like adventure and I do like those things. So it's certainly not for everybody. I have high respect for people who would go very, very deep with, PhDs, and they go and become really, really masterful and very deep in their area. Those are just as important skills to have in that industry. I'm just, and for example, a lot of European education, what I'm finding out, some of the universities like Oxford and Cambridge, they go, much deeper. The United States University goes a little bit broader. And so I think there's a little bit of also cultural differences there. My only concern is, when you go very, very deep in one area, you have to stay so focused in your field, and you have to stay, it's a different approach, one that I haven't taken, but it seems like, to me, you have to constantly renew in that area, and things are moving so fast and industries are becoming so obsolete, that it does become a little bit harder to to kind of move around and find jobs but once you find that job and you're where you are, you kind of tend to stay and you're very, very happy there. And I think that's a great path as well. So for different people, different paths, right?
Yeah, I like that. Different. Somebody, Sir Ken Robinson, I once heard say something like, you don't start by building your resume and then going to do all the things that you've written down. You build it as you go, and sometimes these pathways may take you in different places. But we actually do have to stop now. This is such fun that it's always hard to stop. But you've been great, Asina and Grace. What a magnificent conversation and contribution. Our second session in the series of jobs that don't yet exist, and we want to thank you for that session, which we'll get, which I already see being posted in the chat and elsewhere, that it's been great, but we'll also see much evidence of that in the follow-up with video as well. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to the next session. Look for it out there, coming in about 2 months, the next session on the jobs that don't yet exist.